Hello everyone, my name is Lizzie and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about some books written by female authors that I love and would recommend to you. These are all the ones that I have here that I'm going to recommend, but there are a couple other books that are currently in Alabama, where I go to school, that are there at my house there and not here. But these are the ones that are here today, so I'm going to walk you through them. And I really think that, you know, I don't think that men or women write particularly better than one another. I think they kind of have unique perspectives to tell stories from, but some of them are really good at telling each other's stories too. Thomas Hardy writes women really well, Wendell Berry, there's a couple others. But today we are talking about women's books because I took a American Women's Voices class last semester. And it was great, and I really learned to appreciate like how much reading women's voices means to me, and like why it's important, and I think why more people should read books written by women. And I don't know, I don't think that there's some huge difference between men's books and women's books, but I think that there's sort of a sisterhood for women to read women's books. And I think also a lot of times like women's stories haven't been told accurately because men have a lot of times had the advantage throughout history. So it's really fun when we get to have stories, especially from the past, that are by women, about women, maybe for women, I don't know. So these are some of my all-time favorites. There's also a lot of great female poets and authors of shorter things or essays. These are all fiction, these are all novels. But yeah, and a lot of them are classics too. They're all older. Most of them are American or British literature, but aside from that, they're kind of different. So yeah, the first one is The Blue Castle by Ellen Montgomery. I could have picked so many books by her, and I have a lot of other recommendations, but The Blue Castle is maybe my most favorite. It's about this girl named Valency who lives in Canada and is 29 and has lived kind of with her mom her whole life, and in this community that's very like kind of eccentric, but she's part of this big family, and they all come together and they all kind of like pick on her and they restrict her a lot. She doesn't get out a lot. She doesn't do a lot of stuff. She doesn't have a lot of freedom. She kind of has her own little room, and she kind of gets to her 29th birthday and she's like, my life is like, I've done nothing. And then she kind of gets some news that changes how she sees life, and it changes how she lives her life. But it's sort of a romance, and it's so atmospheric. It's beautiful. She talks a lot about the woods because she kind of goes and lives on this island at one point, and just nature and the changing of the seasons, and I don't know, Ellen Montgomery is so good at writing. This is definitely one of her more mature books. If you've read Anne of Green Gables, this is like similar in style but more mature in content. It's slightly heavier story, but beautiful, dreamy, idyllic, romantic, all that good stuff. And it's 217 pages. So yeah, try The Blue Castle. Okay, the next one is quite different. It's The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. I don't know why I had to think about that. This is kind of an iconic book. It's all over Book Talk. And people love it, but also there's a lot of criticism of it. And I don't know why I liked it so much, because I think even just hearing the premise, I don't know if it like would totally be my cup of tea. But I read it, and I kind of read it intentionally when I did, because I knew that she was 20 in this. It is a novel about the events of Sylvia Plath's 20th year and how she tried to die and how they stuck her together with glue. It is a fine novel, as bitter and remorseless as her last poems. But it kind of covers 6 months of this girl's life, and I don't know, it's kind of sad, but it didn't even feel particularly heavy. It was just and I wasn't expecting to relate to it so much because I haven't had nearly the like struggles with mental illness that she did, but kind of just not knowing, and I know also the fig analogy has gone around on TikTok. That was really striking for me, and it really just, I don't know, being in your 20s, being kind of like a gifted child and kind of burning out and realizing like there comes a point where the accolades and the grades and the awards kind of end, and you can't just strive after those your whole life, and you have to do something with your life. And there's so many different things you can do with your life. You can, you know, as a woman, you can become a mother and a wife, or you can travel the world, or you can become an author, or you can be kind of go into academia. And there's so many different things that she like was like, I could do all these different things. What do I really want to do? And she's also kind of coming out of this like this, I'd say like upper middle class American society that kind of had strict expectations for women. And it was kind of right before, I think she died right before Betty Friedan wrote The Feminine Mystique. And so it was like the same year. So it's kind of like pre-second wave feminism. It doesn't feel like a particularly feminist book to me. But yeah, I don't know. It came at the perfect time in my life because the things that she was talking about being 20 and like almost done with college and like, what do I do with my life? What am I even doing at this point? And what do I want to do in the future? What do I want to it just came at the right time in my life. And I would recommend if you're 20 as well in college, if you feel like you've like been like a very gifted child your whole life, and then you're kind of like, it doesn't really mean anything. This is a good book to read. It's beautiful. It has its faults too, though. It really does. Another book that's kind of controversial is Jane Eyre. Most people, I think most girls, kind of like me, love this book, but it is like highly problematic if you really think about it. But I don't think the point of the book was to be like realistic. This is kind of a classic tale. It's a Bildungsroman, but I think the reason I love this book is because it kind of has a lot of good elements. It has this intense spirituality. She's kind of quoting the Bible all the time, and there's always like a moral dilemma. It's like, do I follow my feelings and what my heart tells me, or do I follow my rational principles and like the things that I know I should do or who I should be? And that's kind of the controversy throughout the whole thing, which I found very compelling because it's something we all kind of, like a lot of us think about and struggle with. But it follows her life, and you just kind of feel like you've been on a journey with her by you feel like you've been on a journey with her by the end. And it's also a romance. There's a lot of love. It's very good for like idealistic people, but also like rational people. And it's also atmospheric. There's a lot of gothic elements that make it really fun, and you don't really know what's coming. There's a lot of fun little plot twists. And it's kind of a page turner, I think. So read Jane Eyre. Okay, the next one is probably my favorite book in the world, maybe? I don't know. It's North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. This book, oh my goodness. So I grew up watching the show, the BBC One adaptation with Richard Armitage, and it's dreamy. It's kind of dark, not dark, but it's kind of depressing. A lot of sad things happen, and it's in Milton, which is this fictionalized version of Manchester during the Industrial Revolution, kind of, and just, it's like a factory town, and yeah, it's just like there's cotton in the air everywhere, these cotton mills, but it's kind of like it's like a more political, it's like a socialist Pride and Prejudice, I guess. It just talks about different like class struggles, and you have this like kind of upper class that's like almost new money, like they've kind of worked their way up and they own these factories, and they're trying to make it work and doing all this business stuff. And then you have the factory workers who are like severely impoverished. They have cotton in their lungs, they're dying left and right, they're not getting fair wages and all of that stuff. So it's really interesting, deals a lot with those issues, but it's also a romance, and there's kind of this like relationship, but it doesn't focus a lot on that. So I felt like it was a good, well-balanced novel. And just the things that are said in it is so, there's just a couple points that I really loved. And yeah, her writing's really perceptive. Elizabeth Gaskell is one of my favorite writers. And yeah, she's very perceptive, very aware, and she doesn't really give in to either side of like a lot of the debates and things happening throughout the novel. She kind of shows like why this was such a complicated time in like Britain's history, and it's just such a good backdrop and very dramatic, and there's a lot of like hard conversations that happen in it, these interesting debates, and both ethical and political, and it's really interesting, and I love it. I love it. It probably ends a little bit too like perfectly, but what is a good little novel without that? Okay, doke, sorry, my camera died. But the next book is Ruth by Elizabeth Gaskell. This is another Elizabeth Gaskell novel. I read this last fall, and it is, I don't even know how to describe it. It's I've heard it described as a more hopeful Tess of the D'Urbervilles. I've not read that, so yeah. But it's like it's beautiful, and it was just really easy to read. I think there was kind of towards the end it dragged a little bit, but it's basically about this girl who is taken advantage of in her naivety, and she kind of doesn't realize what's happened to her, and basically she becomes pregnant and she has a child, and she's like 15 or 16, and Victorian England is very, very hard on people, on women, that unmarried women have children, and so basically she's kind of taken in by this pair, this brother and sister, and it's like very heartwarming but also heartbreaking, and the things that she goes through, they kind of convince everyone that she's like she's a widow, but then kind of the secret gets out, and she's trying to raise her child, and she's really young, and she kind of grows in wisdom, but it's like, it's sad, but it's also beautiful, and it kind of takes, yeah, it kind of centers around like a fallen woman narrative, which I think is so interesting, and I think like Victorian standards for morality and kind of a double standard for men versus women, and I don't know, I think all of that is just really interesting. So I really liked it. It also flew by, like it was just very beautiful and dramatic, and you kind of have these characters in kind of a classic Victorian novel in like a small town. I think this is also her only story that's kind of in like a country town. Maybe not, maybe that's, well, Cranford. Anyway, it was really interesting, and I think there was some intertextuality, and it was very different than North and South. These are very different books, but maybe similar styles of writing, but totally different stories. So try both. You might like this one better, you might like this one better. I think probably most people like this one better, but this is a beautiful story, and it made me cry at the end, which is always a good sign, I feel like. I don't know if I wrote where I was crying. Towards the end. It was towards the end. But it just kind of is such a beautiful picture of like God's love for us as well, and like how that transcends even like things that we think of as like biblical standards of life, and kind of how he takes care of those that have fallen in the standards of the world. I don't know, it's really interesting. Oh, Ruth, read it. It's amazing. Okay, the next two books are from Persephone, and I actually have a lot of these books. Can you see them? They're here. I have more. These are all great books. They're all by women, but I think these are two that I would really recommend. The first is Sophia Petrovna, and this is by Lydia Chukovskaya. It's really short. It's like a novella. It's 140 pages. And it's really interesting because it starts as kind of a happy narrative of a single woman going back to work as her son is like going older and going to school. She's going back to work as a typist in a publishing house, in Russia in the 40s, I want to say. But then everything kind of starts to fall apart. And people, there's kind of this very celebrated attitude towards communism and towards Stalin, and there's like pictures of him everywhere. And of course now, like, it's kind of easy to be like, oh my goodness, this is so crazy, and kind of like they're so stupid, you know. Like, Stalin is not a good guy. But it really shows you how convinced everyone was of the goodness of the party, and how easily they were able to create suspicion against each other, and not against the government. It's just super interesting. And slowly, like, it kind of turns from this like happy, very optimistic tale from this woman's perspective to a very dark and twisted and sad and awful story, where suddenly this woman is completely alone. Everyone around her that she cares about and knows and trusts, like, is gone. And she doesn't trust the party anymore. She doesn't trust the system. You know, she loses her job. And it's like, she's kind of insane at that point. She kind of just hallucinates and imagines that people are coming back and dreams of things. And it's really interesting. So it's about the Great Purges, I think is what it's called in Russia. Yeah. And it's startling because it's so, it's like the only account from the time that we have. Like, people went back and wrote about it, but she's kind of the only fictional account of that that we have. And it's a woman, which is cool. And she worked really hard to get this printed, and it still hasn't been printed and published in Russia to this day, which is crazy. So this is a very important work, and I wish more people read it. And it's really short. It's so thin. Look how thin that is. And it also is a really interesting portrait of like motherhood and the kind of the things that we do, things that mothers do. I'm not a mother. Things that mothers do, you know, for their children, and I don't know, just the simple pleasures of a woman's life. So it's a really interesting book, and I read that really recently. I just finished it. And then we have Miss Pettigrewless for a Day, totally different book. This is by Winifred Watson, and this is it's a Persephone classic. Oh, I didn't say what Persephone books are. Persephone Publishing, I think, is what it's called. Persephone Books. It's a publishing house in the UK. They have a bookstore in Bath, but I think the books are published in London, printed and such. But they put back into print women's writing that's kind of gone out of print or is difficult to find. And so, and then they like sell them, and they have these beautiful editions. I will show you some of the other ones. So the regular ones just kind of look like this. They're this dove gray color. And they have these flaps, beautiful end papers, and they have like dust jackets. And then they have the classics ones, which are colorful like this, and like these. And they have this art on them. And anyway, it's just kind of a cool project. It's a smaller publishing group, but they put out these beautiful editions, and they come with bookmarks. I don't know if this one has a bookmark with it. I got this one secondhand. But I love this book. It's so happy and so so full of character and subtle wisdom. It's a very fun, lighthearted story about this woman who kind of has gone through her life not doing anything kind of for herself. She kind of always lived like thinking love is around the corner, or thinking that, you know, success or like a little bit extra is around the corner. She just never gets it. She's always working super hard. She's middle-aged governess, and she's not really good at anything she does. And she kind of accidentally ends up at this house looking for a job, or thinking that she's responding to a job offer. But the woman that answers the door is this captivating woman who is part of like London society in the, I want to say like the 30s. This woman who's like been living her life very flippantly. You know, she has like 4 different men that she has relationships with, and she just doesn't have any motivation, and she can't decide which man because there's problems with all of them. And she dresses in these beautiful like gowns, and Miss Pettigrew, this little middle-aged lady, is kind of like, this is a dreadful way of living, like very judgmental. But then they kind of start to warm up to each other, and they start to trust each other, and Miss Pettigrew kind of gets to live for a day. That's where the title comes from. She gets to wear some beautiful fancy clothes. She goes out, she stays out till like late at night, and she's like drinking alcohol and like eating all this like nice food, and she wears makeup and she gets her hair done, and she's like, wow, like this is so they kind of learn things from each other, and in return she helps the young lady, Miss Lofoss. She helps her kind of decide on which man. She's like, it's not very kind what you're doing to the men. They all think they have a chance with you, and you're not being kind with their hearts either, so like make a choice. And it's so charming and beautiful, but there's also like subtle wisdoms, and moments that kind of make it a bit more somber and serious and kind of ground it, and I love it. It's joyful. You'll read it so fast. And this edition has little illustrations. I love it, from the original book, and it's so lovely. It's so cute. They just have, I don't know if you can see it. I don't know if it's focusing. But I love this book, and you will too. It's kind of an indulgent novel. So yeah, read Miss Pettigrew Lives for a Day. There's also an adaptation. I haven't watched it, but it has Amy Adams and Frances McDormand, and I want to watch it so badly. I need to find out where it's streaming. But yeah, read this book if you want a good time. If you want a little bit of a palate cleanser, just like a fun little quick story, it's a great one. Okay, next is my favorite Jane Austen book ever, Emma. If you have not read Emma, you're missing out. It's the best Jane Austen book. I love Pride and Prejudice too. It's a beautiful love story, but this is the one. This is the one that really is captivating and inventive and creative and funny, and you won't get tired of it. Like it's beautiful because it has a little taste of romance. It has a lot of romance actually, but it also has these funny things that keep happening. And I think the reason why it's lasted is because Emma is actually not a very likable lead, and in that way she's the most likable. She's the most memorable. She's really funny and annoying, but you learn to love her for her stupidities, kind of like someone else in the book. You and someone else in the book will learn to love Emma. But I think she's just such a character, and so many things happen, and it's just funny. Like if you've ever seen Clueless, that's an adaptation of this, and it's the same, like magic. Like it's so funny. It's so funny. It's like Pride and Prejudice with more character, and you don't know where things are going because it's just so unconventional. And I love this edition too. Isn't that amazing? The little chairs. Yeah, so read Emma. It will take you a second to get into it. It's the longest of her books, I think. Maybe Mansfield Park is longer. But it's long, but it's worth it. It's well worth it. You will love it by the end. Yeah. Okay, next is Daddy Longlegs. This book is kind of a younger girl's book, I'd say. It's probably the most adolescent of any of these. It's often children's book. In fact, this edition is part of the Everyman's Library Children's Classics collection. But I love it. I think it's magical. It's kind of all told in letters. It's about this girl named Judy Abbott who's a orphan, and she lives in an orphan home, and then one day she finds out, well, someone decides to sponsor her finally. And she's like the oldest kid in the orphanage. Someone decides to sponsor her, and decides to send her to college, basically. And I think she's like 17 when it starts. They decide to send her to college, but they won't tell her who they are. I mean, she knows it's a man. It's a man that she kind of sees the shadow of, and she just remembers he has these really long legs, very tall and spindly. And so she calls him Daddy Longlegs. She doesn't know his name, and she's supposed to write him a letter every once in a while and tell him, like, what she's up to. And in return, he'll, like, pay for her education, and, like, expenses. But she doesn't know who he is, and he doesn't write back or anything. And you kind of don't know who he is the whole time. But you get her letters and you get to see how her life is, like, blossoming because of this, like, gift that he's given her. And it's a little romance. Like, she grows up, and the reason I'm telling you romance, because I love reading books because of the romance. And I think a lot of these books are books that have tastes of that, but it's not, like, the only thing. Like, I wouldn't call them romance books. But they have little romantic plots in every one of them, because we all want to love and be loved. And this is kind of a coming-of-age story. It covers a couple years of her life. And it's just delightful. And it's really short. You can read it in a day. So, Jean Webster's Daddy Longlegs. I will write an adaptation of it someday, too. Film adaptation. Okay, this is Rose and Bloom. This is the final pick. Oh! There's one more. Okay, this is Rose and Bloom. And the reason I picked this Louisa May Alcott book, because she's written so many that are good. Little Women, Little Men, Eight Cousins. But Rose and Bloom is the one that has captured my heart the most. I think Little Women probably has lasting powers. I don't know if that's the right word. It's, you know, obviously is very popular. Film adaptations. It's a very popular book. But this book is, it's the book that made me cry. And it's just so beautiful. I think the value that Louisa May Alcott brings to her books is kind of this sense of finding out your moral principles and finding out how to apply them to your life and trying to be a responsible young person. And this is a sequel actually to Eight Cousins, which is about this girl named Rose who goes to live with her uncle, her single uncle, because her parents die. She goes to live with her single uncle who has agreed to raise her, and he and his siblings all live kind of in the same area in New England. I think it's in Boston. And they all have kids. There's 8, like, cousins total. And so, including her. And it's her and then 7 boys. And so, it's kind of about the 8 cousins. The first book is about them, like, when they're younger. Probably, like, I'm guessing she's, like, 11 in it, maybe? She's kind of a kid still. And that's kind of her, like, growing up and, like, not growing up, but, yeah, being a kid and, like, get along with her cousins, and there's so many cute little stories in it. But this is the sequel, and this is when she grows up, when she's blooming into a beautiful young woman. And I have this old copy that's kind of melodramatic on the cover. And she also has this friend named Phoebe who's kind of like a maid in their house, but she's more like a sister to her, or a friend. And it's not just about her growing up, but about the boys growing up too, and finding love, and learning to, like, navigate society, because at the time a lot of the girls were kind of going out to these parties, staying out till like 4 in the morning, dancing and talking and drinking and eating and stuff, and this is in, like, late 19th century America. She kind of learns to embrace, or I don't know, she has this desire to get out and have fun and, you know, match with there's kind of these girls that are very, I don't know, they, like, have the fancy dresses and they have all the men, and she kind of wants to, like, impress them and be on their level and kind of find her place in society. But her uncle, who's so wise, I love him so much, he is like, you know, be wiser about your life decisions, and, you know, think about what you're doing, and, like, it's okay to have fun, but also, like, or I think there's, like, a whole thing about reading books and reading good, you know, solid literature versus like, these French romances. You know, he was like, read things that are of value, like, make sure that the things that you're putting into your heart and mind are things that make life beautiful, like, I don't know, make you a better person rather than just like empty fun. And so that's kind of what the book is about, is her just kind of finding her place as an adult and as a responsible woman. And I don't think most of the time she's even trying to like find a husband. It happens eventually, but it's kind of just her growing up and becoming a good person on her own and not for the sake of other people. And also her relationships with her cousins and their relationships with each other, and them also trying to be good people, because they all kind of have their different own various struggles in life as young men. And it's just so wholesome, and this is the only book that's made me actually sob. Like, Ruth made me tear up. This book made me sob. Tears. For like 10 minutes I was crying. It's crazy. The last book, which is not here, is Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. And this is such a different book, and I realize a lot of these books are kind of similar. A lot of them are like Victorian novels or kind of 19th century like white women writing about their experiences. But Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God is one of my favorite books. It just is one of those books that really surprised me, because I don't know, I think even from the start, you know, it's kind of in dialect, a lot of it, and I was like, I don't know if this is really gonna even be easy to read. I don't know if I'm gonna connect to it, and I really did. And it's so amazing that you can read about someone whose experience is so different from you and so removed from your experience, but grasps your heart so deeply, and also like is written so beautifully. Like, Zora Neale Hurston's way of writing is just captivating and just arresting, I think is a good word for it. And you follow this woman through her life. I can't even remember her name right now, I don't know why. But you follow her through her life, and I think she's married 3 times. And it's kind of crazy because she goes through all of that, and she's kind of alone at the end, and it's like, this is sad, but she's also like happy, and she can sit in it. She has like various experiences with different men, and she kind of sees so much tragedy throughout her life, and she undergoes so much. And she kind of has this moment where she's kind of an awakening. Like, it's when she's married to her second husband, it's pretty awful, and it's like she's just like waiting for like a time to really express herself. And I don't know, something about that, like, it just really got me, and it's written so beautifully, and I love it. I don't know what to say about it, except it's really not just the story of one woman, but it's the story of all women. And though, like, hopefully most of us don't have to experience what she's experienced, we can see her unique experience, and see in that kind of all of like women's unique desires and hopes, and kind of not really stifled. I don't want to say like women are persecuted in today's society, but I think kind of this, what you felt for so long, like a stifled dream, you know, and not just from the system. I think men probably have this feeling too, like these things that just because of society, like we can't all go off and be like artists and poets and or world travelers, you know, like we are required by life from the moment we're born to like live a certain way. And it's such an insightful book, and so well researched, and also like the atmosphere of where she's at and the things that she undergoes with the flood, not the flood, it's a hurricane, I think. It's just really interesting, a lot of the stuff that happens, and it ends so beautifully. It's one of my favorites. Those are the books. I would recommend all of them. I think you should read all of them. A lot of these authors have written a lot of beautiful books, and there's so many more books that I can include on this, books that are on this shelf and books that are not. Yeah, but these are some of my favorite stories by women, about women, and I think there's something special in that experience, just because if you are a woman, you will connect to some of these characters, And if you're not a woman, you will recognize some of these characters. And you may even connect with them. I've read so many stories about men that I, like, relate to, you know? So I don't think it's, like, women's books are for women only or anything like that. I think it's just fun to see those experiences because women are kind of funny things, and I don't know. And they also write really interesting things, and I think the kinds of stories that women choose to tell too are really interesting. And the things that we find important and feel like we should tell. There's so much beauty and pain and heartbreak that kind of are unique to women, and also those things that are universal. So yeah, try out some of these books. And there's so many more. There's so many wonderful female authors that I just haven't read enough of yet. I just want to acknowledge that I'm not trying to leave out certain people. And a lot of these are classics as well. They're pretty much all classics in their own right. Older books. There are a lot of newer women's literature that I also haven't read yet, but that are on my list. And from more diverse perspectives, because that is a good thing about the world right now. We're hearing from more people, more different kinds of people than we ever have before, and also with people that are prioritizing translations more. We're getting to read books from all different kinds of places and times, kind of. I don't know. So yeah, that's what I'd say, is I acknowledge that these books are not the most wide array of like voices and people, but it's not because those aren't important or because I don't value those. It's just because I haven't explored them enough yet. I don't read new books that often, like modern literature, but I've been trying to read more diverse older literature. In fact,
something, if you want, where did I put it? Okay, there's a book. As I Crossed a Bridge of Dreams, Recollections of a Woman in 11th Century Japan. This must be interesting. And that's why I got this, because it's a woman. Not just because of that. I might have still gotten it if it was me, but I think it's just like, you don't get many portraits of women from the 11th century in Japan. In fact, this is probably the only one of those that you will get. So it's just such a unique opportunity to hear something that you normally wouldn't hear.
And yeah, so this is something I plan on reading that's a little bit more diverse and still older. Like, I just like older stories, I think, which is why all these books are older. That's why. But go ahead and read them. They're wonderful, they're lovely, and there's nothing wrong with old books. And these are all books that I think are pretty easy to read, especially Daddy Longlegs, Miss Pettigrew Lives for a Day, and The Blue Castle. Those are some to start with because they're so short. So yeah, enjoy the books and let me know if you've read any of these.